from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network. I'm Reverend Charles Harrison, and on this episode, we're going to be talking about, are we missing something in our conversation about the violence in the city of Indianapolis and even nationally? And what might we not be talking about that we should be talking about when we talk about solutions and fixing this problem? Join me today on Real Talk.
Credit Karma makes building your credit straightforward and stress-free with help from our credit builder. Sign up today at creditkarma.com and start enhancing your financial health. Credit Karma, your partner in building a brighter financial future. Credit Builder plan is serviced by Credit Karma Credit Builder and requires a line of credit and savings account provided by Cross River Bank, member FDIC.
Your business deploys AI pilots everywhere. But are they going anywhere? Or are they stuck in silos, exhausting resources, unable to scale? Maybe you don't need hundreds of AI pilots, you need a holistic strategy. IBM has 65,000 consultants with Gen AI expertise who can help you design, integrate, and optimize AI solutions. So you're not just deploying AI, you're scaling it across your business. Learn more at ibm.com/consulting. IBM. Let's create.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network, and I am Reverend Charles Harrison, and it is a pleasure of being back with you. I've been missing for a couple weeks, but I am back in the saddle today, and I want to talk about an issue that I think all of us are talking about in urban cities all across the country. We're certainly having conversation here in Indianapolis about this issue. But I think there may be something when we talk about solutions or when we talk about the problem of urban violence and what is driving it that we are missing. And when we talk about the solutions to it, this has certainly been a 60-year problem that we have experienced in this country. But I represent, as a pastor, a faith-based group, the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition, that sees violence and certainly in a different light than what we really talk about. You know, most of the time when we talk about this issue of violence, we're talking about what's driving it. And, you know, we hear a lot of people talk about what are the root causes to violence, particularly as it impacts communities of color. We talk about the issue of poverty. We talk about the issue of broken families. We talk about the broken judicial system in our country, particularly when it comes to repeat violent offenders and their frustration in this country about what some believe are progressive DAs that are no longer prosecuting these violent crimes, particularly when it relates to guns, whether they be adults or juveniles, and that tends to be the conversation that we're having about this violence. You know, in the city of Indianapolis, you know, we have had, since 2015, the highest level of violence in the history of the city when it comes to stabbings, when it comes to shootings, homicides, and criminal homicides or murders. It's been the highest that we have experienced as a city. So all of us are kind of grappling with, you know, what's causing it? What are we missing? What do we need to do to reduce the level of violence? I want to propose something today that I don't think that we talk a lot about when it comes to this issue of violence. For me, as a pastor and a faith-based leader, there is something that I think that we are missing in this whole conversation. Not that all of those other issues that people are raising are not important, because they are, but I think there's something that we're not talking about that we need to talk about when it comes to addressing this issue of urban violence in the city of Indianapolis. And I kind of want to talk about that today. And for me, you know, as a pastor, what I think we really need to focus on also, because for me, it is another issue. It is the issue of the human heart. It is the issue of the lack of a moral compass today in our nation, in our country, the disregard for the sanctity of human life. For me, it is that issue of a nation today in the lives of so many people where there is the absence of the presence of God, that moral compass within us. Because we can continue to pass more and more gun laws, but it cannot legislate morality. And it is that issue. Not everyone who lawfully possesses a gun or either unlawfully possesses a gun are committing violent crimes. Why? Have we ever really tried to address that issue? The issue of why some people are choosing to use violence as a means to address their beefs with others. Or they use guns in the commission of a violent crime. Whether it be robbery, whether it be carjacking, or whether you're just arguing with someone and in the midst of the argument, then you pull a gun out to settle your beef with that person. See, I am a pastor, and I believe that, here's a phrase I want you to use, where there is more God, there is less crime. And that what is driving a lot of this violence that we are seeing today is the fact that people have heart issues. This is an issue of sin. This is an issue of evil. This is an issue of wickedness. Which is causing people to do things that they normally would not do, but yet they are doing. And we don't want to talk about that piece. We don't want to talk about the God piece. Because I think there used to be a time in this country, particularly I remember when I was growing up, you know, in the 1960s and the 70s when I was a teenager. And during that time, everybody had to go to church. And during that time in church, whether you was paying attention in church or not, and there were a lot of Sundays where, as a kid and even as a teenager, I really wasn't paying attention in church because I didn't always want to be there in church. But the reality of it is there was stuff going in your ear gate because you was in the church service itself. And whether it was a song being sung or a message from the pulpit, or when you were in Sunday school, there were things that were going in your ear gate that were being taught by the Bible, were being taught from the Bible by the pastor or the Sunday school teacher that became a part of who you were. It created in your life, in my view, a moral compass and thou shalt nots. There were certain things that we just didn't do when I was a teenager, and even though we would come close to a line, that there was a line that we would not cross because we understood that the problem that human beings were facing because of what we believed about sin and God and Satan was that the human heart was important. And that the human heart dealt with your thinking. how you perceive things, how you handle things. And today we're living in a society where people are settling their conflicts, their arguments, their beefs with violence. They're using the gun or the knife or whatever instrument or thing that they can use to hurt another human being. They're doing that. And what is driving that is not necessarily what people think is poverty, and we get into the issues of mental health and all of those things. But what is missing also in this conversation is the reality of the absence of God in the life of people. Where is God in your life? And what I see out there in the community, and I deal with a lot of OGs that work for me at 10 Point, who once, at one point in their life, they were the drug dealer, they were in the gang, they were committing robberies, they were doing carjacking or stealing cars. Many of them went to prison, served their time. They came out and they discovered something when they came out, and they were trying to change their life and put their life on the right path. They discovered the God factor. They discovered that if they were really going to change their life and get on the right path in life, that God had to play an important role in their life. And many of them talk to these youngsters today about what was the key that led them down a different path in life. What really changed their heart and their thinking that led them on a different path in life. Now, we say it's just poverty. I know a lot of kids are coming from broken homes. This is not anything new. There were kids that were in broken homes in the 1960s and 70s when I was a kid, and in the 70s when I was a teenager. There were single moms back then. Yes, there were more fathers in the household. But what was so different back then is that the vast majority of young people went to church. They did. A lot of us had a moral compass that was rooted and grounded in the Judeo-Christian tradition, in the black church. It was those principles and values that were being taught that many, particularly young men of color and young women of color today, are no longer getting because they're no longer in the church. If you were not getting it from home, you were getting it in church. In most of our lives, we were getting it at home and in the church. And because of that, how we thought and what was in our heart was much different. We believed in the commandment, thou shalt not kill or thou shalt not murder. There was a respect for the sanctity of human life. People were selling drugs back then, but people were not being killed over the drug transaction. Yes, there were criminal activity going on. Yes, there were some robberies and people stealing, but people did not take it to the level of violence where that human beings were losing their life at the level that we're seeing today. I know some of you are going to argue that we need to address the gun laws in this country, and too many people have guns. But the vast majority of people who do have guns today are not killing, they're not robbing, they're not committing violent crimes. Why? We have to ask ourselves that question. Why are some kids who grow up in the hood involved in criminal activity and other kids are not? Who may be in the same kind of environment, but yet their thinking is not the same. Does it have to do with how they're being brought up? Does it have to do with their hearts? Does it have to do with whether or not God is playing a prominent role in their life? I would make the argument, yes. I am a Christian pastor. I believe in the manifestation of evil. I believe in wickedness. I believe in sin. I believe that if there was more God in people's lives, we would have less crime. I know some of you who are agnostics or atheists, or you may come from a different faith. Whatever your faith belief is in God, whether you are a Muslim, or whether you are a Hindu, or whatever your religious expression is, I believe these religions that are teaching these moral principles, those individuals are governing their lives at a different level. I'm a Christian. I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. I believe I'm a different person because of what Christ has done in my life and through my heart. I believe I have to put God first in my life. Putting God first in my life is the reason why I did not choose the same path that my brother did in going down the path that led to his death. I'm a part of an organization that is making a difference on the ground because we're trying to address the heart issue with young people who are caught up in the game on the street, who may be selling drugs, who may be in cliques, who may be involved in gangs. The success record of 10 Point is remarkable. In a city in the last 9 years have seen record-breaking violence in this city. But in the 10 Point areas, we have seen in most of those areas over those 9 years a decline, and at the minimum, we have not seen any movement upward. Why? Because those who we engage on the street, we understand that we have to address the heart and the mind. We're not out on the street proselytizing people and trying to convert people into Christianity. That's not what we do. But we understand that if they don't address the issues of the heart, then nothing is going to change positively in their life. We know that when individuals get in an argument, that if they're not able to address the anger in their heart, that anger could allow them to take the argument to the level of deadly force. We're trying to get people to take a different path in life. If you ask me what made a difference in my life, and many of those young people do, and they ask a lot of those OGs that are out on the street, we certainly include the God piece, because that was essential to the transformation in our lives that led us down a different path. It led me down the path of being a preacher of the gospel. It has led a lot of those OGs down a different path where they are now living a productive and successful life. Because we understand that if the heart does not change, then the attitude and the behavior will not change. And that's only going to lead you down a path of destruction. The police have to do what the police are commissioned to do. The courts and the prosecutors do what they do. But if you're putting someone in jail and they come out the same way, then obviously locking them up was not the complete solution. Some would say we need to hold them accountable. I don't disagree with that. But we are holding people accountable, and they spend years in prison, and they still come out the same way. They went in. So they come out, and then they reoffend. I'm saying that there's a piece that's missing in all of this, and that is the transformation of the heart. Because if your heart is filled with love and kindness and goodness and compassion toward others, then you wouldn't be treating other human beings in the way that you do without regard for the sanctity of their life. There is a moral compass in your life through your heart that causes you not to cross certain lines that will lead to crime and violence. We cannot exclude the spiritual part of this, because there is a spiritual part to the crime and violence that we're seeing in Indianapolis and cities all across America. And we must address that spiritual part if there's going to be real transformation and change in people's lives. If we're really going to address the homicide problem or the non-fatal shooting problem or the large number of people that are being stabbed and injured and stabbed and killed, we have to address the issue of the heart. It is spiritual. It is the God factor. And if we don't address the God factor or the lack of God in people's lives, then it's going to be difficult to reduce the level of violence in our streets when you add up all the other root causes that can cause someone to commit a heinous crime. I grew up poor. My parents grew up poor. My grandparents grew up poor. But the difference is we had God in our life that gave us a moral compass that kept us from committing crimes and violent crimes. We did not disregard the sanctity of human life. Even when we were upset and mad at people, even sometimes when we got into fights, it never led to someone being killed because of that line in the sand that we would not cross, because we understood that what we were dealing with was spiritual. Satan was tempting me to violate the commandment of God, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not murder. You have 14, 15, 16, 17 years old juveniles today that are using violence as a means to settle their beefs. There's something wrong. It is not just a parenting issue. It is a heart issue. Now, you may say the parents should be raising their children in the church or bringing their children up in a way that God is playing a role in their life. I won't argue that with you. But what I will say is that you should not have 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, sometimes 13, 12-year-olds, hardcore, out here committing adult crimes and have no moral compass and no regard for the sanctity of human life. That is beyond a poverty issue. It is beyond the neighborhood in which someone was brought up in. It is a heart issue. It is a spiritual issue. And if we don't address that issue, We're not going to reduce the level of violence that we're seeing in Indianapolis and cities all across the country. This is key to reducing this problem. Don't let anybody tell you anything different. I'm telling you what I know, what I have experienced, and what I see. I've been doing 10 Point for 25 years. I've seen a lot of stuff out there on the streets. I can really go back further than that. When I was 15 years old and my brother was killed at 21 years old and I was out in the streets. What kept me from crossing over and being a thug and a gangster and a drug dealer was the fact that my parents brought me up in the church. There were things that I just would not do because of what was inside of me. I not only believed in God, but I tried to live the Christian life. And one of those things was, thou shalt not kill. To treat others the way you want to be treated. To not allow the sun to go down on my anger that would cause me to do something harmful to my neighbor. Those are principles that we used to live by in this country. When God was the center of our lives. We have a society today where God is no longer the center of people's lives. And that's why you have this chaos in cities across the country, in our nation, and why in many cities we're dealing with a public safety crisis. It is the absence of God. I don't care what laws you put on the books. I don't care how many people you jail. If you don't address the God issue, there's not enough prisons in this country that you can build to keep people out if you don't deal with the root cause of the problem, which is a heart issue. It is the absence of God in the lives of people. That's why people are doing things. That's why juveniles and children are doing things that horrify some of us because we don't understand how they could do it at that young age. It is because there is a lack of God in their lives. And where there is the absence of God, there is the presence of evil and wickedness. That's why you're seeing adolescents and juveniles and young adults do things that many people think were unimaginable. They're not anymore. If you don't have a moral compass and you don't have the regard for the sanctity of human life, there's nothing that you won't do. And the argument that I make is if there is an absence of God in the life of people, then there's nothing that people will not do to another human being. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing family members kill family members because there is an absence of God in their life. We're not addressing the real root cause of senseless violence, which is the heart issue, the spiritual issue, the absence of God in their life. That's the debate that we need to have in this country. That's the conversation that needs to be included in all these other solutions that people are bringing to the table. And I'm not disregarding these other solutions or the other root causes that people want to talk about. But what you cannot ignore is the human heart. What you cannot ignore is the spiritual issue of the absence of God in the life of individuals that helps give them a moral compass and a regard for the sanctity of human life. And until we address that issue, we're going to have a problem in this nation. The madness is going to continue. We're going to continue to turn on the TV day in and day out to watch the news. And we're going to continue to hear these stories about violent crimes or more police-involved shootings, which we just had yesterday in Indianapolis, the 15th of this year. We had a gob of them the year before. I know people are going to say it's mental health issue. That's part of it. But the bigger issue is the heart. I know people are going to argue, well, it's poverty, it's broken home. Yes, those things do exist. But they existed 50 and 60 years ago. And we did not see this level of violence. Why? Because the role of the church and God played a greater role in the lives of people. People had a greater moral compass. People had a regard for the sanctity of human life. They believed that thou shalt not murder. The vast majority of people did. You may get in a fight, but it didn't lead to someone being stabbed and killed and shot and killed like we're seeing today. This is tragic. I can't recall a juvenile that was gunned down when I was a teenager. That stuff was unheard of. And if somebody did get killed, most of the time it was in their 20s, like my brother, who was out there in the underground economy. Because we live by a different moral standard than what we're seeing today. The church and God played a greater role in the lives of people in our society today. I make this statement and make the argument that if we don't address this spiritual issue, then the level of wickedness that we will continue to see in this country will only get worse. And my prayer is that we include in our solutions the issue of the heart, which is driven by sin and wickedness and the absence of God. This is Reverend Harrison on Real Talk. I hope you enjoyed this conversation I had with you today concerning the issue of violence in America and what I believe is the heart issue and the lack of God in the lives of people in this nation today. I believe we're a better nation than what we're seeing today. And I believe we can do better. Thank you so much for joining me on Real Talk today, and I pray that you will subscribe to this podcast and you will share this podcast on X and Facebook and other social media sites so people can be a part of this conversation and the issues that I raise concerning the things that affect us every day. I pray that you have a blessed and you have an awesome day. Until we meet again, this is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison. Be blessed.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.